Hey guys, we're back and going to finish up jQuery traversing. We'll look at the siblings and the jQuery filtering section here. So, talking about siblings, let's go to the same page we were working at before, working on before. I did want to show you that I've modified the HTML slightly from what we had before. I've added this class students that I only apply to the div tags where the student entries are. So where that's going to kind of come into play with some of the stuff that we do. But first of all, siblings, what do siblings do? Siblings returns all of the elements that are sibling elements to whatever element that you've selected. So for example, if I were to select, um, if I was, I guess is the correct grammatical way to say it, if I was to select student one, right, using just the ID of that element, which is this one right here, right? It corresponds to this whole section here that says bill and the grades that are involved. So if I select student one and I say for all the siblings of student one, um, I want to apply a border. We'll give it a CSS border. Um, let's see, CSS border of solid 1px red. Then what are we expecting to happen here? We're expecting that everything that's a sibling, and remember now, for this particular div right here, everything that's on that level is a sibling. So this H2 is a sibling, this div is a sibling, and then the next div down is a sibling. None of this stuff above it, this would be a parent, right? None of the stuff below it, these would be children. So it's just those divs in that H2. So let's see if that indeed does what we think. And it did. It put a red border around each of those guys. So that'll return every sibling, whether it comes before or if it comes after the particular item that you've selected. You can also kind of target a specific sibling based on some other criteria by doing this. So let's say instead of adding the red border to everything, we only want to add the red border to the H2 tag that's a sibling of the div that we selected. So what I can do here is inside the siblings function, I can pass to it some further selector to narrow down the list of items that are returned. So I want to get all of the siblings that are siblings of student one, but that are H2 tags, right? And that's the one I want to set with a border of red. In this case, there's only one sibling that's an H2, so it should just set test scores at the top here. So let's see if that works, and indeed it does, right? Sorry, it's gray because I had selected it. But there you go, you've got a red border around that. We were able to select that one sibling, okay? Now next, what does next do? Next is connected with the idea of siblings because it's going to select the next sibling in the list, okay? So let's say we did exactly the same thing that we just did, but instead of, as far as we're selecting student one and we're setting the border to red, but instead of doing it to the H2 tag, we want to do it to the sibling that comes right after student one. So in this case, if this is the student one element, right, this next sibling is going to be this guy here, student two. So let's replace siblings here with the next function. And if we hit enter there, sure enough, now Dan, that student, has a red border around it, right? Now, like I showed you guys last time, you can kind of chain these together and select on down the list, right? So if I do student one, that selects Bill, right? This portion here. But then if I do next, instead of selecting Bill, it selects this guy. But look at this, if I do next again, and then apply the CSS border to that, next again is going to select this guy. So if I hit enter there, sure enough, Rob is selected, okay? If I wanted to put a red border on everything that comes after Bill, I can use the next all function. So if instead of saying next, I do next all, this is going to select every sibling that comes after whatever our first selector is, right? So for every sibling of student one, next all is going to grab that and it's going to apply this border to it. So if I hit enter there, Dan and Rob are all of the next siblings that come after it are going to have that border added. And if we inspect this, we can actually see it in the source here in the inspected version. See, here's student 1, student 2 now has this border applied to it, and the div ID student 3 also has it, because both of those divs are siblings of this div up here, which is what our first selector is. Okay. All right, so let's refresh that. Let's by the way, so you've got siblings, you've got next, next all. You can read about next until. That's not one that I don't know that I've ever used that, but it basically selects everything until some other criteria that you supply. Previous works just like you would think. It's the opposite, right? So if instead of doing like here where I did next and put a red border around Dan because it was the next sibling after student 1, if I do that and instead of next I do prev, for previous, it's going to select the previous child, and the previous child of student 1 is this H2 test scores. So I do that, and now I get a red border around that. So previous all would get all of the previous siblings, just like we saw with next getting all of the next siblings. All right, so last of all, let's talk about filtering. Few methods here. First, last, EQ. EQ we've already looked at, but I'll just go over it again quickly. Filter and not, all of those methods or functions. So let's refresh our page, and let's talk about first. So if I, before we did next all here, and next all returned all of the siblings, right? And then it set the border for that. So when I did that, it put a red border around everything that came after Bill. But if I want to just select the first one of the siblings that's returned, I can, after next all there, I can call the first function. If I do that, oh, wait a minute, that didn't like that because I left off the T. Let's go back again. If I do first there, it's only going to select the first sibling that's returned, and in this case, it's the div that contains Dan's information, right? If I were to do the last sibling, right? In this case here, the only siblings that that student 1 has is it's H2, student 2, and student 3. Those are all the divs. And so if I'm selecting, well, let's do this. Instead of using next all this time, let's do siblings. So remember, siblings selected everything. So if I do student 1, pound student 1, and if I do siblings, siblings will return all of these. It will return H2, student 2, and student 3, right? But if I say get the last of the ones that are returned, and then maybe we're going to hide that instead of setting the border this time, what it's going to get all of those, and then the last one's going to be the student 3. So what should happen is Rob is hidden once we run that. And so we run it, sure enough, Rob goes away. And you can see up here that it actually added display : none as a style to that particular div. All right. So that's the way first and previous works. It also works on, for example, we could select every LI tag. Okay, so I could do for every LI, right? This would select every LI on the page, and then for the first LI, which is going to be this 90 up here, I could say for that first one, let's do something a little different. We're going to set the background color this time. We'll set the background color of that first LI to be light gray. All right, and there you go. So it returned all the LIs. That's what this selector did here. But then first said, I'm only going to now select the first of all the LIs that were returned. And that's the one I'm going to apply this CSS background color to. Now, what about filter? Filter allows you to take the list that's returned and then filter it by some other criteria, right? So let's say, for instance, we want to grab. Okay, here's an idea. So if I were to do, let me refresh the page. If I were to say for every div, let me do this. If I say for every, what do I want to do here? I'll do, yeah, every div, that's fine. Every div, I want to place a border around every div that's on the page, okay? And I set the border to be solid blue 3 pixels, okay? So if I do that, I get a border around Bill, I get a border around Dan, I get a border around Rob, because those are all divs, but I also get a border around this outer div, because remember, all of these divs are contained within another div out here. And so this selector selected every single div on the page and it added that border to it, all right? But let's say we only want to add the border to the divs that have this style students applied to it. So we could do that like this. Let me refresh. We could use the filter function. So for every div that's returned, I want to filter that list, and I want to filter it by saying only apply this style to the ones that are using the class students, right? So if they have that class students applied to it, then we want to select those divs only. So now if I run that, it only applied the blue border to Bill, Dan, and Rob, because those were the only ones that were div tags that had this class students. And you know, we could actually do that. I guess it would probably look a little better if we did something like border dash top. So then we kind of got like a dividing line between each of those guys. All right, so we could do something like that. Let's see, and so that's the way filter works. And then last of all, not. So what would we do with not? Let's say, for example, that we do, okay, here's an idea. What we're going to do is we're going to select all of the siblings of our H2 tag, okay? So if I do H2 and select the siblings, that's going to select all 3 of these divs here, right? And if I apply, we'll do again a border. Let's see, when do we do a background color? How about that? CSS background color dash color, and we'll put a background color of yellow behind these guys. So if I run that, for all of these siblings here, it puts a background color of yellow. But maybe we want to only do a background color on every other div. And so let's say we're going to do the background color on student 1 and student 3, but we don't want it to be applied to student 2. So how could we do that? Well, for all of the siblings of H2, then we could say we want to select all of this. Let me refresh. Sorry. We want to select all of the siblings of H2, but not the sibling that has an ID of student 2. Right, so every sibling except the one that matches that criteria. And if I run that, sure enough, it puts a yellow background on Bill and a yellow background on Rob, but not the one that matched pound student 2. So that's the way not works. I left off EQ. We did go over that last time, but I'll just show you that again very quickly. The way that EQ works is EQ allows you to select which number of items, when several items are returned, which one of those you want to apply this to. And so, you know, we've got a way to select the first item that's returned. We've got a way to select the last item that's returned. But what if you've got like 4 items that are returned and you want to actually select the second one or the third one, you know, not the first one or the fourth one? And so we can use EQ to select a specific one. And so in this case, let's say we'll do again test scores. We'll do siblings of the H2 that's on the page, but we're going to apply the background color to, this time we want to apply it to the second guy that's returned, not the first, not the last, but the second one, since there are 3 siblings for that. So what we can use is EQ. And remember, I told you EQ is 0 based, so the first item that's returned is 0, the second one is item 1, the third one is item 2. So if we want to turn the second item, if we want to select the second item that's returned, we want to use item number 1. And so if we do that, what this should do is, since the siblings for test scores for this H2 are student 1, student 2, and student 3, this should return the second one of those guys, which is going to be student 2. So let's see if it does. And indeed it does. It selected the second one that was returned from the siblings, and it set the background color to yellow. All right, so that's everything, guys. If you have any questions, as always, reach out to me, and Lord willing, I hope to see you guys soon after all of this is over. Praying for you and hope you're doing well. Bye-bye.